This is the historical lecture in the Theodicy section of our Reforming Wisdom class. There is not much more to add that has already been said about the historical context of the book of Genesis itself. It was written from several sources spanning 5 centuries, primarily to document stories and laws and provide a linear history. The Torah, also called the Pentateuch, are the first 5 books of the Bible, and the authorship is attributed to Moses. They are still a central reference for Judaism. These books make up the first portion of our Christian Bible. This is the foundational narrative of Jewish identity, into which Jesus was born. The gathering of some of this information occurred during the exilic period, when the Jews were exiled to Babylon after the destruction of Jerusalem. Imagine today, in 2017, the Syrians trying to go back and put together their history, not living in the country of their birth, and not knowing when they were going to get to go back. Violence and evil were very much a part of life. The question of why was asked repeatedly throughout the Torah and the Bible. Violence and evil are still a part of our life. Those are the stories that make the news, and those are the questions that are still being asked. The Psalms of Lament stand out in particular. It is very easy for us to place Martin Luther on a spectrum of world-changing personalities, because he is one of the most accessible personalities. Not only does he have prolific writing, given that he loved to write about himself. Martin Luther's favorite topic for writing and conversation, outside of the Bible, was himself. But the theological battles that he were engaged in are the theological battles that we are engaged in. We are always struggling with the existence of evil in the world. Martin Luther himself leaves us with some very funny imagery when he says that he would either moon the devil or laugh at him whenever he was tempted, which was often. Fortunately for us, this struggle, this bridge between the human and the divine and the trying to understand, occurred in a time when writings about him were readily available. His lectures were recorded by his students who took notes, and then those notes were compiled. His table talk, or sermonizing at the dinner table with friends and family, were also recorded later, and Martin Luther often provided commentary on them. Like us, Martin Luther lived in a time when violence and even atrocities were happening. He specifically spoke out against some of them, particularly when acts of violence were done in his name. One of his writings is Against Thieving and Murdering Peasants, which he wrote during the German Peasant War, which was supposedly done at his behest. He abhorred this type of violence and spoke against it as often as he could. Some of Luther's writings are taken to justify violence, particularly against the Jews. While I am not saying that we have to forgive all things, we cannot judge the 1500s by the standards of 2016. We need to understand that there were different ways of approaching things and different levels of knowledge. While he abhorred violence personally, culturally, this was something that was not unexpected. He also evolved to a more gospel-led thought when it came to the Jews. specifically. This is something that many Lutherans struggle with and will continue to struggle with. When you have a founding father who has views that are abhorrent, we must struggle with this. Whether or not we can resolve it is something that is between you and God. Violence and evil were very much a part of life, and they still are, and it should still be condemned. But like now, it's also not unexpected. It may have been more readily visible in terms of the seeing of a hanging is not something that we go to today, nor are we expected to. That object lesson is not necessary. People died quite easily in the 1500s, and they still do today. It just might not be quite as visible. There was an expectation, culturally, of life being a punishment for sin, of life being a battle between good and evil, with the coming apocalypse always looming quite large. Martin Luther himself did not believe that the gospel would be brought to all of mankind without the devil fighting it tooth and nail and taking the world with him. Martin Luther taught his students to view all human history since the fall as being caught in an apocalyptic battle. This profoundly shaped how he looked at the past, the present, and the future.